All right, so now we're gonna get into this book. I found it and that was very interesting when I found it, and just definitely want to share with you guys. So it's called "A Study in Hebrew and Indian Language," written by Thomas W. Brookbank. It says here, Ricks College, Rexburg in Idaho. If it be found that large numbers of similar or identical forms characterize any two languages which are said by competent judges to be constructed on like principles, we have fair ground for assuming the most of the like forms are not accidental coincidences. And finally, if real analogies are shown to exist between the two languages, it is evident that they have sprung from a common source. And the value of simply similar or identical terms becomes very important as sustaining the evidence supplied by true analogies. Such are conditions respecting the claim that the Indian languages have come from the Hebrew. Okay, again, such are the conditions respecting the claim that the Indian languages have come from the Hebrew. If there were but few such terms mutually characterizing them, they should be considered of no great value in this matter. But as the case stands with hundreds of similar or identical forms listed, it is not in reason to say that they stand a close second to analogies in support of the proposition that the Indian language had their primal source in the Hebrew. Consideration of the two words that have been listed is next in order. And the name Yutta, okay, we're going to start with Yutta, shall be taken up first. All right, it is one of wide use and has been applied to Indians in one form or another in Arizona, Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, and California, that whole southwestern United States. You see how big Utah really was. We got maps that show that. In the western parts of the United States, while in eastern districts in a variant form as Utah. You see that? So on the east we find the same word, but it just spelled a little different. E-U-T-A-W, Utah. Utah. It is used as the name of a town in Alabama. And in 1781, a battle was fought between the British and the Americans at Yudah Springs in South Carolina. So you hear that? I know that these springs were sacred land and holy places for the American natives. So fighting there, you know, man, I'm sure they didn't like that or want to do that, but they probably had to. All right. Utah, and Yutta with the E-U-T-A-W and Yutta are names applied to an Indian language. Payute, and P-Ute literally mean river, Utah, river. Example, Yutta as spoken by certain Indians living on the Colorado River. Yampa, Utahs, designates Utes who live or have lived south of the Uitas. Now it says here, Hebrew. All right, so let's see if we can understand this. All right, so it says Yam is a Hebrew form which among other things means south. Okay, we got that from who? UB News, right? UB News. Thank you for the perspective with the compass and the direction, right? And the what it really meant in Hebrew, in ancient Paleo Hebrew. So it says here, Jam means south, right? Here we have an example where a Hebrew word has a correspondent in both form and sense in Indian speech. All right, so he's saying that we just got right. Jampa, Utah. Jampa, so southern Utah. Jam is a Hebrew form, which among other things means south. Here we have an example where a Hebrew word has a corresponding both form and sense in Indian speech. Further, we find in Hebrew the names Yutta, Jutta with Juttah. We're gonna address that J though. Jatba and Jata. And according to Dr. John, Jutta and Jutta. So before we continue, just remind you, we're just talking about Utah, right? So look at this. So take away the J. What do you have? You have Utah. Take away a T. That's Utah, right? So it says Utah, pronounced Utah with a Y. Is a town in Israel identified with modern day Jata. So that's the hijack. Jata.
As it says here, Utah, right, was a Levitical city in the mountains of Judah, or Jutta, named in connection with Sif, Jezreel, in the neighborhood of Maon and Carmel. It was allotted to the priest, so it was a Judean town or city, Utah, Judah, right? And we're just talking about Utah, right? Or from Spanish, what? Utah, Y-U-T-A. So just add a T and you get the same name as in the Bible. Name of an indigenous Uto-Aztecan people of the Great Basin, perhaps from Western Apache, which is Yudah, Judah, high, in reference to living in the mountains. Living in mountains? Wait, let's go back. Utah, extended, a Levitical city in the mountains, or hill country of Judah, living in the mountains. People living in the mountains. Utah, Levitical city, right? Joshua 15:55 says here, or 21:16. Its modern name is Jutta. It is supposed to have been the residence of Zacharias and Elizabeth, and the birthplace of John the Baptist, and on this account is annually visited by thousands of pilgrims belonging to the Greek church. But alright, so we're letting you know. So if you're looking for the residence of Zacharias and Elizabeth, you gotta go to Utah. Alright, Utah, Judah, living in the mountains. Levitical city in the mountains. Again, according to Dr. Jung, Utah and Jutta are either of them pronounced as if spelled Utah with a Y, he said. Now, turning to the name Jotba, which is found alphabetically in place in the body of the concordance, we are there told that Jotba is the same as Utah, an ancient town in Judea. Whoa! Utah, an ancient town in Judea, now called Jata, which is no faraway variant of Jata or Jutta. Again, what we gotta get up here, Jutta, look at that, Jutta, alright? The meaning of Jotba is given as excellent for water, and we know that whole area right there was very watered back in ancient times, alright? We know they're building dams and they're, making deserts, creating deserts and, stopping the flow of certain rivers. But that whole area there was watered, well watered. We know the Salt Lake. We know there was an ocean there. We know we got the Utah Lake. We have reference to that being the Sea of Galilee. All right. We got the Jordan River. We got a lot of water actually under Utah. We're going to get into that. All right. So again, excellent for water. All right, Jotba, which is the same as saying Jutta or Jutta. All right. Other proper Hebrew names spelled with initial J in English should also be pronounced as if their first letter was Y. Why is that? Because there was no letter in the ancient Hebrew alphabet that English J is the equivalent of. There was no J's. All right, so what we talking about here? There is no J's in Hebrew. All right, we're talking about Jehovah, not Jesus. All right, and for this reason, Dr. John authorizes the change in the form and the pronunciation of the words in hand. In about 300 examples of biblical Hebrew proper names, which are spelled in English with initial J, our learned Hebraist authorizes the substitution of Y for J. Oh, so he authorized it. But we already know there's no J's in Paleo Hebrew, and we're going to see that Y's are not even, that came a little bit later as well. All right? We have more of Wa, Wa, Wa. The Wa, Wa, instead of the Ja. All right? In this proper form, Jata, Jata, Jutta, and Yutta are close variants of one another. Jutta, Jutta, Jotba, and Jata all being names applied to the same place. Alright, these are all the same, and thus evidently having the same meaning. We see how appropriately this state has been given the name which it bears, namely Utah, which, as already observed, means excellent for water. Alright, within its boundaries there is a large inland sea. Inland sea. There's a large inland sea. We're talking about a Dead Sea, right? Inland sea. Several freshwater lakes of fair size, many smaller ones, while a number of rivers are fed from its mountain ranges, and numerous small streams course down its canyons and make fruitful the rich soil. We're talking about Kemet, rich soil, black soil, rich soil. Doesn't mean a specific location. Of its valleys, and when the very excellent quality of its drinking water is taken into consideration. Also, who can think of a more appropriate name for this member of the American Union than Utah, which is short for excellent for water? At present, white people and likely Indians also use the name Utah without reference in a single instance to its ancient meaning. But it is evident that the Hebrews in Judea thousands of years ago had it. All right, it's evident. So they had the word Utah, is what he's telling you, and it was a city that was basically a place, an excellent source for water. All right.
With an inconsequential difference in orthography, and then gave to it a meaning which makes it so remarkably fitting to advertise in a single word certain natural conditions or resources of great value with which Utah is blessed. It is remarkable that the Indians have preserved the ancient form of the name in what is essentially purity. All right. All right, so before I continued, we were just talking about Utah, right? We saw what it meant, excellent for water, right? Excellent water, place with excellent water, right? So it says here, Department of the Interior, United States Geological Survey, Charles D. Walcott, Director, underground water in the valleys of Utah Lake and Jordan River, Utah. Underground water, all right? Excellent for water. We're not making any of this up, all right? This is written in 1906. All right, so it says here, look at all the contents. So it says here again, underground water in the valleys of Utah Lake and Jordan River, Utah. Jordan River. All right. The valleys, well, it says this is by G.B. Richardson. It says the valleys of Utah Lake and Jordan River are situated in north central Utah, in the extreme eastern part of the Great Basin. The lofty Wasatch Range, the westernmost of the Rocky Mountain system, limits the valley on the east, and relatively low basin ranges, the Oquirrh Lake and East Tintic Mountains, determine them on the west. The valleys trend north and south and are almost separated by the low east-west Traverse Range, the slopes of which constitute a dam for Utah Lake, which drains through the Jordan River to the Great Salt Lake. Again, all right, so let me explain this. So we've been able to see a lot of correlation with the Utah Lake, the Jordan River, and the Great Salt Lake, meaning with the Sea of Galilee as the Utah Lake, the Sea of Galilee, because the Sea of Galilee actually also drains, if you go to the biblical verses, it drains, from the Jordan River to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, right? A salt sea. Well, it does the same here in Utah. Right, so it goes from the Utah Lake, the Jordan River, to the Great Salt Lake. It empties into that, just like in the biblical scripture that the Jordan River does as well, from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. The area under consideration is the most populous and flourishing part of the state. Salt Lake City and Provo, the first and third cities in the state, and many other thriving settlements are there located. At Bingham Junction and Murray, a number of smelters treat the ores from nearby mines, but agriculture is the main industry. Water for irrigation is supplied by mountain streams, and intensive farming is successfully pursued. The practice of irrigation was begun by the Mormon pioneers in 1847 and has been discussed in several publications. Little attention, however, has been given to the underground water resources. Little attention. You think it's a desert over there, right? Can't drop. Thank you for putting this perspective into us and letting us know how in Scripture it tells us, right? It tells us that these dry places will be fertile, will have water again. Springs will come out again. It's a promise. All right. So we know in this ancient land, Judah, right? Deuteronomy 34. We know now. It's called excellent for water. There's a town in Judea that was called Yutta, excellent for water. And we know now that in underground water resources here in Utah, right? There's a lot. And so far as the writer is aware, they have not before been described. The present paper outlines conditions of currents of the subterranean waters and describes their development in the valleys of Utah Lake and Jordan River. All right, so this book, I'm not going to read it all, but it goes into a lot of detail in this. I'm going to leave the link there. So, this is the Utah Lake. This is what the Mormons are calling the Sea of Galilee, and it does make sense because we can see that the Jordan River goes this way, right? See the mouse into the Great Salt Lake up here, or the Dead Sea, right? We know we got Moab and Nebo all around here, so we know these are biblical lands. We can see Cedar Valley. We know about the cedars of God and Lebanon, place of whiteness. We know Aslan is in Utah. Aslan is the mythological place, origin of the Aztecs, the Mexica, and it also means place of whiteness. So we are putting the dots together, fam. So we gotta just know this, and we gotta keep researching. We gotta help each other, and whatever anybody finds, share it with everybody else, so we can get this going, a lot stronger. Get the correlation, get the evidence recorded. All right, put it all together. Yeah, so a lot of research in this book. Definitely shows how much water is underneath Utah, just waiting to spring up, waiting to water the valleys here. And this drawing, this map shows here, says explanation: area in which groundwater lies within 10 feet of the surface. Within 10 feet, all this, these lines. Look at all this water around Utah Lake. All right, and it says area in which groundwater lies deeper than 50 feet below the surface. Deeper than 50 feet. And it says base of mountain, approximate position of the Bonneville shoreline. So this is the old ancient lake called Bonneville that was here. There was 2 ancient lakes here, and I think the last one was the Bonneville one. And I'm not reading the book, but here's the diagrams, the maps. There's another one, Great Salt Lake. It says here, Williams L, Salt Lake City, and you see this diagram where it says here, area in which flowing wells are obtained. So anywhere on these, you can get wells. You can dig a well and get water. Whoever has land here, has good land. They can get water, fresh water. Base of mountains is the approximate position of the Bonneville shoreline. Wells, the record of which are shown on plate 5. So there's a well here, I guess. All these dots, there's wells all over these dots. All right. So again, we're in the book back, A Study in Hebrew and Indian Languages by Thomas Brookbank. And what does it say? Yutta, which is short for excellent for water. All right, Utah means excellent for water. Was this an Eden? Was this one of the original Edens? Was it the original Eden? All right, so isn't it beautiful how we do some, all this correlation like this? We weren't ever looking for stuff like this, but when you start going into it so deeply like this, you start seeing how everything starts fitting together. Written from the Archives of Aboriginal Knowledge, containing all the original papers laid before Congress. All right, before Congress, respecting the history, antiquities, language, ethnology, pictography, rites, superstitions, and mythology of the Indian tribes of the United States by Henry R. Schoolcraft, LL.D., with illustrations in 6 volumes. This is volume 1. And it says here, in regard to the manners, customs, habits of the wild tribes of the Western Territory. A true and more correct type than any I have ever seen may be found in the ancient history of the Jews or Israelites after their liberation from Egyptian bondage. The medicine lodge of the Indian may be compared to the place of worship or tabernacle of the Jews, and the sacrifices, offerings, purifications, ablutions, and anointings may be all found amongst and practiced by those people. The customs of Indian women at certain periods and after childbearing are almost those of the Jewish women. They have to undergo a probation of a certain number of days on all such occasions, besides ablutions and purifications, before they are considered fit to enter on their domestic duties. During this probation they are considered unclean and altogether unfit to enter the lodge or join with the family, which indeed they never attempt, but erect a hut for themselves when they remain the whole time, having their food brought to them. The manner of mourning for a deceased relative is very similar to that of the Israelites. In such cases the men will cast Hawa. 1 Chronicles 12:8. And it says here, and of the Gadites there separated themselves unto David into the hold to the wilderness, men of might, and men of war fit for battle, that could handle shield and buckler, whose faces were like the faces of lions. Again, whose faces were like the faces of lions, and were as swift as the roes upon the mountains. Jaguar warriors. Reading from the book Letters and Notes of the Manners and Customs and Conditions of the North American Indians by George Catlin. Alright, George Catlin, he lived amongst the natives as well. We got him in some of the videos. Says here, I am compelled to believe that the continent of America and each of the other continents have had their aboriginal stocks. Alright, so he's saying that America had aboriginals just like in Africa and Australia and any other place, peculiar in color and in character, and that each of these native stocks has undergone repeated mutations, at periods of which history has kept no records, by erratic colonies from abroad that have been engrafted upon them, mingling with them, and materially affecting their original character. By this process I believe that the North American Indians, even where we find them in their wildest condition, are several degrees removed from their original character, and that one of their principal alloys had been a part of those dispersed people who have mingled their blood and their customs with them, and even in their new disguise, seem destined to be followed up with oppression and endless persecution. The first and most striking fact amongst the North American Indians that refers us to the Jews is that of their worshiping in all parts the Great Spirit, or Jehovah. Dash the hijack, we're going to see it's more like Jehovah, as the Hebrews were ordered to do by this divine precept, instead of a plurality of gods, as ancient pagans and heathens did in their idols of their own formation. The North American Indians are nowhere idolaters. They appeal at once to the Great Spirit and know of no mediator, either personal or symbolical. You hear that, right? No mediator between the Most High and you. No Jesus, no mediator, either personal or symbolical. No images, symbolical in any way. Isaiah 43, right? Only one Savior, the Most High. The Indian tribes are everywhere divided into bands with chiefs, symbols, badges, and many of their modes of worship I have found exceedingly like those of the Mosaic institution. The Jews had their sanctum sanctorums, and so may it be said that Indians have in their council or medicine houses, which are always held as sacred places. As the Jews had, they have their high priests and their prophets. Amongst the Indians, as amongst the ancient Hebrews, the women are not allowed to worship with the men, and in all cases also they eat separately. The Indian everywhere, like the Jews, believe that they are favored people of the Great Spirit, and they are certainly like those ancient people, persecuted as every man's hand seems raised against them, and they, like the Jews, destined to be dispersed over the world and seemingly scorched by the Almighty and despised of man. In their marriages, the Indians, as did the ancient Jews, uniformly buy their wives by giving presents and in many tribes they very closely resemble them in other forms and ceremonies of their marriages. In their preparations for war and in peacemaking they are strikingly similar. In their treatment of the sick, burial of the dead, and mourning they are also similar. Their bathing and ablutions at all seasons of the year as a part of their religious observances, having separate places for men and women to perform these immersions, they resemble again, and the custom amongst the women of absenting themselves during the lunar influences is exactly consonant to the Mosaic law. This custom of separation is uniform one amongst the different tribes, as far as I have seen them in their primitive state, and be it Jewish, natural, or conventional, it is indispensable form with these wild people who are setting to the civilized world this and many other examples of decency and propriety, only to be laughed at by their wiser neighbors, who rather than award to the red man any merit for them, have taken exceeding pains to call them but the results of ignorance and superstition. After this season of separation, purification in running water, and anointing, precisely in accordance with the Jewish command, is requisite before she can enter the family lodge. Such is one of the extraordinary observances among these people in their wild state. But along the frontier, where white people have laughed at them for their forms, they have departed from this, as from nearly everything else that is native and original about them. You don't do it anymore. In their feasts, fastings, and sacrificing, they are exceedingly like those ancient people. Many of them have a feast closely resembling the annual feast of the Jewish Passover, and amongst others an occasion much like the Israelitish feast of the Tabernacles, which lasted 8 days, when history tells us they carried bundles of willow boughs and fasted several days.
Yo hallelujah, hallelujah. 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 Yeah, yo, yeah. Hiya hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiya hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiya hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiya. Hiya hey yo we hey yo we hiya, hiya hey yo we hey yo ale yo ya heleya, 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 yo ale yo ya heleya. Hiya hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiya hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiya hiyo we hiyo we hiya, hiya hiyo we hiya hiyo we hiya. Hiya hiyo we ho, hiya hiyo we yo we ya, hiya hiyo we yo ale yo ya heleya, yo ale yo ya heleya, yo ale yo ya haleya, hiya hiyo we hey, hiya hiyo we ya, hiya hiyo we yo we ya, hiya hiyo